He said 15 minutes is the shortest he's ever talked in his life. Now, again, being an economist, I kind of wonder if that has something to do with the length of the average nap. But I don't think that's the case with this guy. I think you were in for quite a treat, and it's an exciting and interesting idea. And the question is, is there in fact a moral case for the free market? I think we should let Dr. Eric Daniels tell us. Dr. Eric Daniels. Okay.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to do something dangerous first, and then something controversial. And in the spirit of the danger that you've seen on this stage today, people randomly walking up and asking if they can do other people favors, it sounds potentially a little dangerous. Announcing in public that you hate the golden rule, a little bit dangerous, Rapid, walking on glass, laying on glass, doing all kinds of performance on glass, certainly dangerous. Whitewater rafting in kayaks, incredibly dangerous. But the idea that I think is worth spreading, the idea that I think is not just worth spreading, but that's crucially important for our world today, is a dangerous idea. And the idea is so dangerous that when I speak about it, I have to think about the hundreds, the thousands, in fact, the millions of people who die in the name of this idea. And every year, violence erupts over this idea. People are uncomfortable with it. People don't like it. But I think it's desperately needed in our world today. And that idea is freedom. Now, that's the dangerous idea. That's the idea that people don't like, letting other people have freedom, letting other people do what they want according to the judgment of their own mind. But that's something I believe in very deeply, that every human being has a moral right to freedom. Now, the controversial thing that I'm going to tell you about is that I think that capitalism, the free market, unregulated laissez-faire, is the best way that we can achieve that freedom for all people. Now, when the organizers of this event asked me here and asked me to speak about the moral case for capitalism, I knew that there would probably be some raised eyebrows, some furrowed brows, some people who might not quite see where I was coming from. Capitalism, after all, has been getting a bad rap. It's the cause of greed, the crash in the marketplace, the pollution of the environment. Capitalism has been blamed for any number of ills. And I think fundamentally, capitalism has been misunderstood. Many of the problems in our world today do not exist because of the capitalist system. I think, in fact, they exist because we don't have enough freedom. I consider myself radically in favor of freedom. And I think that that's something that we need to discuss today. So when they asked me here, and they asked me specifically to talk about Ayn Rand's idea about freedom, I thought, well, this is a great opportunity. I'd love to do that. Many of you probably have heard of this book. Nice short book. 1,168 pages. And then they told me I only had 15 minutes. And I said, well, explaining those ideas is going to be a little bit more difficult. And this book, by the way, is something of a publishing phenomenon. For those of you who know it, you know that it was published in 1957, almost 60 years ago. The author, Ayn Rand, died in 1982. And yet the book last year sold 500,000 copies. That, I think, is something to take note of. And the reason I think it's something to take note of is because Ayn Rand's idea about capitalism, Ayn Rand's defense of the free market, is unique. Today, often the defense of the free market goes along the following lines. In the midst of the financial crisis, many economists, many pundits, and others decided that they would paraphrase Churchill, that they would say, yes, capitalism is a broken system, but it's better than all of the others, as Churchill once said about democracy. But I don't think that that's a good defense of the market. And I'm not here to tell you about the economics of capitalism. I think the economics of capitalism are well understood. We know that in general, the capitalist West has more prosperity, more material production. We've heard today some about perhaps excessive production. We know that it works. It puts things on shelves. When refugees came from Eastern Europe, from Soviet Russia during the communist period, and they walked into grocery stores, it was often reported that they would break down in tears unbelieving at the abundance that was available to everyday consumers in the United States. We look at the map of light production. Famously, when that map of the night world first went around, everyone conspicuously noted that North Korea was almost entirely blank, that the communist regimes of the world do not lead to productivity. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, after the opening of the East, people know this. It was apparent to them. It was abundantly obvious. And yet capitalism still gets a bad rap. And the reason for this, and the reason that I think this is because capitalism is not understood properly. In fact, I think the whole field of economics in many ways is not understood properly. If you ask people a definition of capitalism, they'll tell you that it's a system of allocation of goods under scarcity which uses the system of private property. Or they'll tell you that it's a system where the means of production are privately held. And if you ask them, well, what is an economy? What does it mean to have an economy? They'll tell you, an economy is the allocation of goods. We have scarcity in this world. We have unlimited desires, an economist will tell you, and yet we have limited resources. And economics is all about figuring out how to get those resources to the needs and the wants that we have through some mechanism. But Ayn Rand suggested that this is a misunderstanding of the idea of an economy, of capitalism. There's a crucial problem here. When economists tell you that an economy is basically made up of three inputs: land, capital, and labor, and the different allocations and different combinations of those resources leads to productivity and leads to the production of goods, there's a certain error there. There's a question that remains unanswered. Under what conditions does that crucial element that we call labor, or sometimes call human capital, operate? Do people just produce no matter what? It's like a Santa Claus view of the economy. Santa comes around every year with a big bag of goods, and it's limited. He has scarce resources that he can allocate to everyone, and so he maintains a list of who's naughty and who's nice. And he figures out, right? And this is what economists talk about. Does the list have too much disparity between the top and the bottom? Does the list encompass merit, or does it encompass favoritism? But the question that Ayn Rand wants to ask, and I think that's crucial for us in our understanding of capitalism as a system of freedom, is under what conditions are those products produced in the first place? In a sense, this is the Elves' view of Christmas. Do the elves work under any conditions? Do they create under any conditions? Does productivity grow on a tree? Or are there certain fundamental facts about human nature that make it necessary for us to operate under a particular moral economic system? And I say the answer is yes. There are a set of conditions. Human beings, like all creatures, have a distinctive mode of living. They have a capacity that leads to flourishing, that leads to our survival. And that capacity uniquely among all of the creatures on this earth is our capacity to reason, our capacity to use our rational mind to apply our ideas to the problem of survival, to ask ourselves, how do we take what is given in the world, what does not serve our needs, and transform it, reconfigure it, and mold it, build it, create it, invent it, cause the world to serve our needs. Unlike the other creatures, human beings are relatively not adapted to survival. We don't run particularly fast. We don't have claws. We've lost our fur. We don't have an innate means of survival. We have to figure it out. We have to figure out whether the berries are good to eat or whether they're poisonous. We have to figure out how to build structures such as this lecture hall. We have to figure out the principles of engineering, of chemistry, of mycology, of any field of human endeavor that helps us survive, that helps us flourish. We have to apply our reasoning minds to that problem. And the thing that Ayn Rand points out about the system of capitalism in relation to the human mind is that capitalism is uniquely the system that respects individual rights. Individual rights, not just the right to property, not just the right to freedom of conscience, not just the right to any of the things enlisted in the Bill of Rights, but fundamentally the perspective that individuals have rights to be protected against the encroachments of anyone, of their community, of their governments, of criminals, of anyone possible. And that respecting individual rights ultimately means respecting the idea of freedom. Freedom fundamentally is the freedom to act, the freedom to try new things, the freedom to be creative, the freedom to do things that other human beings have never thought was possible, to invent things like the phones that we keep in our pockets, like the technology that helps us broadcast lectures such as this around the globe, like the food that's on our table and the ways that we grow it, the ways that we can adapt our knowledge to solve some of the problems that we've heard about today. This is fundamentally an activity of the rational mind. But the rational mind does not work under any circumstances. It only works under freedom. It only works when it knows, when it has the capacity to act. Thinking about something, thinking about and coming to a conclusion about something doesn't work under any condition. It works only under freedom. The example I always tell my students, and it's not quite an example of a lack of freedom, but the example I always tell my students, it's like when I'm driving down the interstate, and I'm just cruising along, listening to the radio, and suddenly I see the sign for the lotto, or the Powerball, and I see it says, $237 million jackpot. I think to myself, wow, what could I do with $237 million? I think, okay, well, the first thing that occurs to me is that it's probably only about half of that after taxes. So let's say roughly about $100 million. And then I start calculating, well, let's see, $100 million, I could pay off my car, I could buy a house, I could do all sorts of fun stuff. And I start calculating through, thinking of what I can do with that money. And then it always occurs to me, by the time I get to the next exit, I've already started thinking about something else. Because fundamentally, I don't play the lotto, there's no way I'm going to win the lotto, there's no existential consequence to my thinking about that. It doesn't matter. The same thing is true with people who exist under conditions of force, of coercion. When people are told what to think, told what to do, told how to use their property, told how to live their lives. A lack of freedom fundamentally frustrates the human mind, and it prevents all of the wonderful and varied things that you've seen today, all of the solutions that have been proposed, all of the performances. Just imagine for a moment, in this last performance, imagine that a system of capitalism, literally speaking, makes it possible for people to earn a living by doing nothing but vibrating atoms in the air, singing. It makes it possible for the creativity, all of the solutions that people come up with. It makes it possible for all of these wonderful things. And that, I think, fundamentally is what's worth spreading, the idea of freedom. And that idea of freedom, crucially, is an idea of protecting the rational mind, protecting people's ability to succeed or fail, to come up with new ideas, to test them out, to see whether they work, to see whether other people find value in them. That's what's crucial in today's world. The lack of freedom leads to a lack of progress. And so crucially, it's capitalism as an engine of progress that fundamentally protects that system of freedom, because it leaves people free to try new ideas, to experiment, to come up with new ways and new solutions of solving some of life's problems, and proposing those ideas to others who can join them voluntarily, not through compulsion, but through choice. That, I think, is crucially what it's all about. And so I want to end briefly with a statement. For those of you who may have read this, you probably already know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to give it away. It's, after all, a mystery novel. So I'll just give you a brief selection from Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. I encourage you to read it. It's a mystery novel, as I said. It's about an economy that's falling apart and who's at fault. Somehow, I think that might be why it's selling so many copies. It's a murder mystery. Who killed the economy? But I think the fundamental issue is not an economic one in this book. What Ayn Rand wrote in this book was fundamentally about a moral revolution, a revolution where people took seriously the argument that every human being has a moral right to freedom, uncoerced, unimpinged, untouched by those who they don't agree with, by those who have a different idea, that individuals have a right to be free, and that freedom needs to be protected. And the reason that freedom needs to be protected is because of the crucial value that the human mind serves in our lives. So let me end just with this brief quotation. In the name of the best within you, do not sacrifice this world to those who are its worst. In the name of the values that keep you alive, do not let your vision of man be distorted by the ugly, the cowardly, the mindless, in those who have never achieved his title. Do not lose your knowledge that man's proper stature is an upright posture. Do not lose your knowledge that an intransigent mind and a step that travels to unlimited roads is the proper estate. Do not let your fire go out, spark by irreplaceable spark, in the hopeless swamps of the approximate, the not quite, the not yet, the not at all. Do not let the hero in your soul perish in a lonely frustration of the life you deserved but have never been able to reach. Check your road and the nature of your battle. The world you desired can be won. It exists. It is real. It is possible. It's yours. But to win it requires your total dedication and a total break with the world of the past, with the doctrine that man is a sacrificial animal who exists for the pleasure of others. Fight for the value of your person. Fight for the virtue of your pride. Fight for the essence of that which is man, his sovereign, rational mind. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.